After that, things became hectic. Sonny had to push himself to the limit to fight against multiple opponents while maintaining the pace with the rest of the group. Knowing that slowing down meant death, he slashed, dodged, blocked, and moved back without allowing himself even a moment of respite. Slowly but surely, countless wounds began accumulating on his body. But even then, it wasn't enough, so he pushed himself past his limit. After all, this was the exact situation he had been preparing himself for by enduring the ruthless onslaught of the Stone Saint day after day. The inevitability of having to fight against an overwhelming force. Dark, vehement fury ignited in his chest, washing away pain and fear. Come and get me, I'm right here. Who did they think they were trying to kill? Noticing 4 new abominations answer his call, Sonny couldn't help but laugh. Good, good. Their assault came fast and without mercy, not leaving him any room to breathe. But Sonny welcomed it. Dodging one of the skeletons, he dashed forward and positioned himself behind another one, so that its body blocked the path of the third. He couldn't do anything about the fourth one for the moment, but its attack was accounted for. It was going to hurt like hell, but not to the point of killing him. Bloodweave was going to take care of the rest. The midnight shard cut through the air and severed the undead creature's knee, causing it to clumsily fall to the ground. At the same time, cold fingers tore into Sonny's side. He had already shifted his body to make sure that they were not going to damage any vital organs. With Puppeteer's shroud taking most of the damage, Sonny only ended up receiving 5 deep scratches, which then instantly welled with blood. Crap, that hurts. But he didn't regret it. The only thing he regretted was the fact that, with the shadow wrapped around the midnight shard, he couldn't observe its movement during this long and arduous fight. Just imagining the kind of insight he could have gleaned from it filled him with avarice. Turning around and reversing his grip on the sword, Sonny commanded the shadow to move onto his body. Almost instantly, he felt a rush of power fill his muscles. In the same fluid movement, Sonny took a step toward the monster that had just wounded him and delivered a crushing blow with the pommel of the tachi. The skeleton's jaw flew away in a rain of broken teeth. Taking another quick step, Sonny circled around the disoriented creature, hooked his hand around its damaged skull, and tore it clean off the spine. Then he pushed the decapitated creature into the 2 remaining ones, briefly slowing down their approach. By the time the undead abominations regained their balance, Sonny was already upon them. The midnight shard flashed 3 times, turning the 3 skeletons into 3 piles of bones. Taking a step back, he narrowly avoided the claws of the last remaining skeleton, the one whose leg he had chopped off at the start of the skirmish. Sonny glanced at the creature that was madly crawling toward him and finished it off with one powerful thrust. Then he groaned. Crap. I think I overdid it. Sonny was bruised, hurting all over, and covered in blood. What's worse, he was exhausted. This moving battle was too intense and had lasted for too long. Even with his endurance enhanced by the bloodweave, he was nearing the point where his performance would start dropping rapidly. Once that happened, he would die, because the damn undead creatures were not only immortal, but also tireless. Just as this thought appeared in Sonny's mind, a new wave of skeletons lunged at him from the depths of the tunnel. Tiredly raising his sword, he gritted his teeth. Time for Plan B. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At some point, the tunnel they were currently in was briefly drowned in a brilliant wave of pure white light. Glancing over his shoulder, Sonny noticed that Nephis had finally summoned her flames, channeling them into the blade of her sword, just like on the day they had fought against the carapace demon. Faced with the blinding radiance of the incandescent blade, the skeletons almost seemed to melt. Perfect timing! Using the momentary disorientation of his own opponents, Sonny dashed back and commanded the Stone Saint to switch places with him. As they passed each other, he sent the shadow from his own body onto that of the taciturn stone knight. Almost immediately, the Shadow Saint's eyes blazed with menacing carmine fire. Her skin shone with dark radiance, and wisps of ghostly gray fog appeared from beneath her stone-like armor like dancing flames. The impenetrable darkness of the catacombs suddenly seemed to become even deeper, embracing her like a vast black mantle. "Yeah, I have some tricks up my sleeve too." A second later, the shadow crashed into the undead creatures, sending splinters of bones and severed limbs flying through the air. She proceeded to massacre them, moving from one to another in a graceful storm of darkness and destruction. Taking her place near Kai and Cassie, Sunny was finally able to rest for a few seconds. His battered body was screaming with pain, and the gray fabric of the puppeteer's shroud had turned heavy with blood. With two wielders of divine aspects activating their hidden cards almost simultaneously, the cohort got a chance to catch their breaths for a few short moments. However, it was clear that this calm wouldn't last long. Sunny didn't really want to show all his cards yet, but the situation left him little choice. He doubted he could continue this mad dash for much longer. Plus, chances were that the rest of the party, preoccupied as they were with their own share of the undead monsters, would either fail to notice the sudden alteration happening to the Stone Saint or assume that it was just an ability of hers. Using the opportunity, Sunny took a look at the condition of his companions. It was not good. Changing Star's armor was battered and torn, with blood seeping down her right side. Effie's shield looked like it was on the verge of coming apart, while her white chiton was painted red. Castor managed to preserve some semblance of a collected look. However, there was a deep gash under one of his eyes, his face bloodied and grim. Kai was doing not much better. He was pale and visibly exhausted, his auburn hair disheveled and soaked with sweat. No, Sunny didn't even want to think about his own sorry appearance. Only Cassie, whose Tier 6 armor made her less likely to be attacked by an enemy, looked more or less fine. However, her flying rapier had several visible nicks on its slender blade, and looked tired and dispirited overall, as much as a flying weapon could look like anything. In short, one thing was painfully apparent from their state. If things didn't change soon, all of them were going to die. Skillfully using his sword to cut down a skeleton that had suddenly lunged at him from a side passage, Sunny strained his lungs and shouted, "Hey, Effie, how far are we from the exit from this damned place? When is this going to end?" Swatting away an undead monster of her own, the huntress briefly glanced back and grinned. "What do you mean, end?" "What does she mean? What do I mean? Isn't it obvious?" Turning back to concentrate on the horde of enemies in front of them, Effie yelled, "What end? This was just a warm-up." Sunny cursed and prepared himself for the worst. A few moments later, the short respite they had gotten was over. With a sound that reminded him of rushing water, a terrifying wave of undead monsters crashed into their formation, threatening to break it apart. Effie braced for the impact and withstood the furious onslaught, somehow managing to split the wave in two. From one side, Changing Star dove into the torrent of skeletal wraiths, her incandescent sword cutting through them like a ray of pure sunlight piercing the darkness. From the other, Castor's enchanted blade was doing the same. The scion of the Han Li clan moved with astonishing speed, turning into a blurry whirlwind of ghostly green steel. Everything that touched it turned to dust. Sunny glanced at Kai and said in a hoarse voice, "Prepare yourself." In the next moment, the wave of monsters was upon them. Left without the comforting protection of his shadow, Sunny could only rely on his own ability, cunning, and technique. Dashing forward, he clashed with the first skeleton. His sword flashed through the air with lightning speed, and a headless corpse instantly fell to his feet, blindly clawing at the stones in front of it. Sunny had never fought like this. From the first day on the Forgotten Shore, he always had something helping him resist the horrors of the dream realm, be it his shadow, cover of darkness, changing star, or the stone saint. Now, he had to face the torrent of nightmare creature with nothing but his own frail human body, and resolve. This was the ultimate test of pure skill. Gritting his teeth, Sonny tried to remember the feeling of clarity he had experienced after the carapace centurion had crushed his rib cage with one strike of its terrifying bone scythe. All unnecessary thoughts were obliterated by his will, leaving only two: kill your enemy, prevent the enemy from killing you. Using this clarity, he entered the state of flow. His perception expanded, absorbing every detail and aspect of what was happening in the dark tunnel. His thinking accelerated, turning the mayhem that surrounded them into a stark and streamlined pattern of cause and effect. Connected to the underlying law of it all, Sonny was able to react to the actions of his enemies faster and predict them better. Neh! With a hissing sound, the midnight shard cut the air and slashed the next monster across the chest, splitting the skeleton diagonally in two. Without paying the defeated creature any attention, Sonny instantly lunged at the next one. His movements were fluid and unpredictable, but also grounded and firm. Every strike, every step was calculated and efficient, focused on delivering the maximum amount of damage while preserving as much of his strength as possible. It was a perfect combination of the two seemingly contradictory battle styles that he had learned. Just like that, Sonny danced between the countless undead monsters, his sword cutting one after another down. The midnight shard wasn't unimaginably sharp like Castor's gene, nor filled with annihilating white flame like Neff's radiant longsword. However, it refused to give in and remained unbroken. No matter how many tough bones the Tachi cut, not a single dent appeared on its blade. With blood streaming down his body and sweat biting his eyes, his muscles on the verge of breaking apart and his lungs desperately burning for air, Sonny somehow kept up this mad tempo and fought. At some point, he heard a furious roar from somewhere ahead and briefly looked up, noticing that Effie had dismissed her battered round shield and finally summoned the beautiful bronze spear. With it in her hands, the huntress became even more deadly. Multiple skeletons burst into a shower of broken bones, cut apart by a wide arc of the ancient weapon. However, at the same time, more and more wounds started accumulating on Effie's body. Despite everything, things weren't going well for the cohort, or at least it seemed that way for a while. At some point, however, Sonny noticed that the number of skeletons attacking the cohort from the front had begun to diminish. Pretty soon, Nephis, Effie, and Castor were getting a few moments to catch their breaths from time to time. The pressure on himself had also lessened. The stone saint, on the other hand, had to hold off an ever-increasing number of undead creatures attacking the party from the rear. When the balance of the rolling battle noticeably shifted, Changing Star gave a command to change the formation of the cohort. She quickly dashed back to reinforce the taciturn shadow, while Sonny moved forward to support Castor and Effie at the head of the group. Once he got there, the huntress gave him a tired smile. "Hey, doofus, you look like shit." Sonny glanced down and had to agree with her. With his armor torn in a dozen places and soaked through and through with blood, he looked pretty much exactly as dead as the nightmare creatures they were fighting. However, Effie's state wasn't any better. He smiled crookedly. "Thanks, you're quite a looker yourself, you know." The huntress scoffed and then turned away to face another of the undead abominations. "Hold fast, we're almost there," she told the truth. After several more minutes of furious fighting, the tunnel they were moving through suddenly opened into a large cavern. A few meters in front of them, the floor of the catacombs was broken, collapsing into a vast, seemingly bottomless chasm. That terrifying abyss was filled with darkness that even Sunny's sight couldn't pierce. The chasm was no less than 40 meters across and stretched far into the distance to both left and right, like a dark border separating the world of the living from the world of the dead. A rickety rope bridge was drawn across it, connecting to a similar-looking tunnel at the other end of the abyssal chasm. The rope bridge looked like a derelict of ancient times. It was flimsy, slippery, and rotten through and through. She doesn't expect us to actually use it, does she? It's so obvious that this thing will collapse as soon as we step on it. Has she not seen any Sajuk? Even if others somehow survive, there's no chance that I, with that damn attribute, will make it to the other end. Sunny turned to Effie and scowled, really hoping to be surprised by her answer. So, what now? The huntress looked at him in confusion. What else? We crossed the bridge. Sunny sighed. Of course they had to cross the bridge. Why had he even bothered to ask? Great. At least the damn thing was empty of the skeletons. The path to the other side of the chasm was clear. What is clear is that I'm going to die. While Sunny was consumed by these unhappy ruminations, Effie and Castor quickly threw the few undead creatures remaining in front of them over the edge of the chasm. Finally safe from their constant attacks, most of the cohort took a chance to quickly catch their breaths. Only Nephis and the Stone Saint were still fighting. In fact, the overwhelming pressure of the pursuing horde had grown so heavy that they were barely holding on. Two figures, one shrouded in shadows, the other bathed in pure white light, were slowly buckling under the furious onslaught of the army of the dead. Sunny gritted his teeth. If nothing changed, they were going to be the ones being thrown into the dark abyss very soon. With a grim expression on his face, he glanced at Effie and said, "Go." Leaning on her spear, the huntress weakly shook her head. Someone will have to hold them off long enough for everyone to get to the other side. You should, Sunny interrupted her. I'll be the last one to cross. Don't worry, I have a plan, a crazy plan. But what else was new? Giving him a long look, Effie hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. All right, stay alive, Sunny, he quietly chuckled. Ah, I didn't know you cared. She stared at him for a bit and then calmly said, No, it's just that if you die, pretty soon I'll have to fight your scrawny corpse. So don't do that, okay? With that, Effie beckoned others to follow her and stepped on the rickety bridge. Sunny blinked a couple of times, watched her go, then turned his back to the chasm and sighed. Right, what else did I expect? In any case, there was no way back now. Brandishing the midnight shard, he dashed forward and joined Changing Star and the Shadow Saint in their desperate fight. Dispatching a couple of skeletons, Sunny briefly turned to Nephis and said, Retreat to the bridge. Saint and I will hold them off. Her eyes shone with white flames through the visor of the Starlight Legion armor's helmet. A moment later, he heard a hoarse voice. Are you sure? He dodged the claws of an especially menacing monster, bashed it away with the pommel of the tachi, and yelled, Yes, but... Another undead creature fell to the midnight shard. When you get to the other side, you need to destroy the supports of the bridge. Do you understand? Changing Star hesitated, almost missing the timing of her attack. Then she asked, What about you? Sunny laughed. Don't worry about it. I have a way to get across. Neff didn't answer for a while. Finally, she simply said, All right. Not one to waste words, Changing Star didn't say anything else. When the opportunity presented itself, she silently retreated, letting Sunny take her place. Now, for the hardest part. With Nephis gone, all the monsters of the catacombs descended upon the Stone Saint and him. Sunny cursed, feeling that the tiniest mistake would spell his doom. The onslaught of the undead horde was beyond anything he had expected. Desperately trying not to drown in the torrent of ferocious abominations, Sunny fought with everything he had left. Damn it all! How the hell was she able to hold this position for so long? Not prone to heroic displays, Sunny used the shadow as a meat shield, stone shield, and hid behind her from time to time, emerging from the cover of the taciturn monster, only to deliver a strike or two and disappear again. The two of them worked beautifully together, almost as if sharing one mind. Well, what else did he expect? She was his shadow, after all, and his shadow was currently wrapped around her stone body. The armor of the menacing knight was still mostly intact. However, even it was battered and broken in several places. With a dark expression on his face, Sunny noticed a stream of ruby dust pouring from one of the breaches. The stone saint was wounded. This needs to end fast. Feeling his own endurance running out, Sunny wanted nothing more than to fall to the ground and rest, even if it meant dying. But instead, he doubled the intensity of his attacks. There was no need to hold anything back and preserve his strength anymore. He just had to last for a bit more, a dozen seconds at most. But even a dozen seconds seemed like an impossible dream. Impossible. He knew someone who was in the habit of making impossible things happen. With a furious growl, Sunny cut another skeleton apart, received a glancing blow to his already wounded side, and stumbled back. The shadow appeared in front of him, enduring a rain of attacks with the help of her already battered shield. Her feet slid on the stones, but the taciturn knight stubbornly held. God damn it, when? As if answering his silent cry, a loud rattle followed by a thunderous boom informed him that the bridge had been brought down. Now, there was nothing connecting the two sides of the terrifying chasm. Sunny was left alone against the horde of immortal monsters, with no way to retreat. Finally, turning his back to the undead creatures, Sunny peered into the darkness. Seeing the cohort waiting for him on the other side of the dark abyss, he lingered for a moment, sighed, and ran to its edge. The shadow slipped from the body of the stone saint and wrapped itself around his own. Suddenly weakened, the taciturn monster held the entire horde back by herself for a split second, and then dissolved into darkness, returning to the tranquil expanse of the Soul Sea. With no obstacles to slow them down anymore, the flood of skeletons lunged forward. They were just a meter or two behind Sunny, stretching their deadly claws to tear him apart. Too close! Approaching the abyssal chasm, Sunny briefly glanced into the impenetrable darkness that filled it, and, without pausing even for a second, jumped off the edge. Crap! Jumping into the bottomless dark abyss, Sunny briefly regretted every decision he had ever made in his life. How did he end up in this situation? Where did he go wrong? However, there was no time for self-reflection. He wasn't ready to see his whole life flash before his eyes yet. There were more pressing matters. Before the momentum of his jump waned, Sunny summoned the prowling thorn. By the time the triangular dagger materialized in his hand, he was already beginning to fall. Not wasting any time, Sunny threw it with as much power as he could, while simultaneously sending the shadow from his hand onto the blade of the kunai. The throwing dagger flashed in the darkness of the underground cavern, streaked the wide chasm, and embedded itself into the hard rock on the other side of it. Because of the enhancement of the shadow, it got deeply lodged in the stone. Yes! A moment later, the invisible string connecting the prowling thorn to Sunny's wrist drew tight. Instantly, his hand was violently jerked forward. Holding on for his dear life, Sunny swung through the darkness with incredible speed. Behind him, dozens of skeletons plummeted into the chasm, with more being pushed down with each second. However, he was already far away. "Huh, bite it, you bastards!" A couple of seconds later, all humor was smashed out of him by the hard impact against the opposite wall of the crevice. Sunny tried to soften the blow a little, but it still hurt like crazy. His bones groaned, on the verge of breaking apart. A couple of them probably did. Sunny blacked out for a moment or two. When he came back to his senses, his wrist was in agony, with the invisible string of the prowling thorn slowly cutting deep into its skin. Hissing, Sunny gripped the thin string with his other hand and relieved a part of the pressure. Then he looked up. 10 or so meters above him, 5 pale faces hovered above the edge of the cliff. On them were written expressions of horror, shock, and astonishment. "Oh, right. I guess they don't know about this memory of mine." To the cohort, his desperate trick must have looked like simple suicide. From the perspective of people who didn't know about the secret enchantment of the prowling thorn, Sunny just took a running start and jumped into the abyss, only to disappear into its darkness without a trace. It was as though he had chosen to sacrifice his life to give the others a chance to escape, like some sort of a stupid hero would. Do they even know me? Like I'd ever do something like that? Swinging on the invisible string, Sunny strained his aching chest and yelled, "Hey, idiots! I'm down here." Slowly, 4 of the 5 faces turned to look straight down. Their expressions were rather comical. Cassie simply tilted her head, but her expression was priceless as well. Grinning, Sunny began to climb up. Since the string of the prowling thorn could change its length at will, he commanded it to shorten and rode comfortably all the way up, stepping lightly on the vertical wall of the chasm from time to time to make the process faster. Soon, he climbed over the edge of the cliff and sprawled on the cold ground, breathing heavily. The rest of the cohort just stared at him. "What?" Effie was the first to speak. Glad you're alive, Sunny. But also, what the hell? How did you do that?" He simply threw her the kunai. Once the huntress bent down to pick it up, Sunny pulled on the invisible string and made the dagger fly back into his hand. "Oh, that was a piece of cake. Nothing that a knife and a piece of string can't solve, more or less." He decided to omit the fact that he had almost soiled his pants in the few short moments between jumping off the edge of the chasm and successfully embedding the prowling thorn into the rocks on the other side of it. Effie blinked a couple of times, then slowly straightened herself up. Cool memory. Where did you get it?" Sunny dismissed the kunai and tiredly waved his hand. "You know those porcupine monsters back in the city? I got it off one of those." With that, the others left him alone. They were all hurt and dead tired too. Everyone needed to rest and patch up their wounds. Nephis made a move to try and heal them, but was stopped by Effie. The huntress darkly shook her head. "Not yet. There's one last hurdle to overcome. We'll need you to be at the top of your game." Changing Star glanced at her, lingered for a few moments, but then sat back down. Out here, the word of the Pathfinder was the law. If Effie said that Nephis needed to save her strength, then she had to obey. Sunny was too exhausted to care. He knew that he was not going to bleed out thanks to the blood weave, and that was enough for now. He just wanted to rest. Sometime later, he heard a shuffling sound and looked up to see Kai sitting down near him. The charming archer looked way too pretty and put together for a person who had just lived through the same mayhem as them, but Sunny was starting to suspect that this infuriating trait was just something he would have to come to terms with. Maybe Kai had some weird attribute that made him look good no matter the circumstance. Looking at the beautiful young man, Sunny sighed and said, "Hey, Knight, how are you doing?" Kai scratched the back of his head and answered, All right, I guess. That was intense back there, huh?" Sunny nodded. "Yeah, so what's up?" The charming archer hesitated for a bit. "Nothing, really. I just wanted to say 3 things to you." "What a strange guy." "Oh, all right, go on." Kai looked at him thoughtfully and said, "Well, first of all, I now fully understand what you meant when you said that you are crazy, because that jump of yours, that was really crazy." Sonny chuckled. "I guess so. I'm alive, though, aren't I?" The archer gave him a nod and smiled. "Another thing I wanted to say is that I also understood how you managed to survive all those months in the ruins. Your swordsmanship, I've never seen anything like it. I think that very few people in the Dark City would survive a clash against you, so everything makes more sense now." Sonny didn't know how to feel about that praise. On one hand, it was nice to be acknowledged for something he worked so hard on. On the other hand, he still preferred being considered a cowardly weakling. It made killing fools far easier. He shrugged. "Thanks, I guess. What is the third thing?" Kai was silent for a long time, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, he shook his head and cautiously said, "Right, about that jump of yours, you do remember that I can fly, right? So I could have carried you over the chasm, no problem. So, why did you do it?" Sonny stared at him silently for a while, an inexorable expression on his face. God damn it. To be honest, in the chaos of it all, he did forget about this crucial detail. After a long stretch of awkward silence, Sonny opened his mouth and said in a flat tone, "Oh, it just seemed like a good idea at the moment." Kai blinked and gave him a strange look. A good idea?" Sonny cleared his throat, then glared at the charming young man. "It worked, didn't it? So let's not talk about it again, ever, okay?" After a while, Sonny regained enough of his senses to warily look around. The tunnel they were currently in was somewhat different from those they had traversed while fighting the horde of undead monsters. It looked more weathered and decrepit, with its walls and floor smoothed and uneven, as though eroded by something over the course of countless years. What's worse, it was wet. With a cold shiver, Sonny realized that they were surrounded by puddles of black water. The smell of sea salt permeated the air. Looking up, he found the tall figure of the boisterous huntress and asked in a raspy voice, "Where are we?" Effie glanced at him and gestured up, 100 meters or so below the surface, pretty much exactly under the city wall. He stared at her blankly, slowly comprehending the meaning of these words. The huntress gave him a nod. "Yeah, you guessed correctly. Come night, this place is going to be full of seawater. That chasm behind us is what prevents the catacombs from being flooded by the dark sea." She sighed tiredly. "So, unless we want to drown or be eaten by some depth dweller, we need to get out of here as soon as possible." Sonny closed his eyes, imagining a roaring torrent of black water erupting from the mouths of countless tunnels and falling into the abyssal chasm like waterfalls made of pure darkness. Yeah, if they were still underground when that happened, sea monsters would be the least of their problems. The sea itself would kill them. Luckily, the day was still young. Effie's words served as a signal. A few moments later, Nephis rose to her feet and glanced at the members of the cohort. Her pale face was calm and composed. "Time to go. Gather your strength." With sighs and groans of pain, everyone stood up. Sonny was the last one to follow suit. "Ouch, that hurts. I'm really starting to wonder if fighting Harris was a better choice." But no, it wasn't. Terrible as it might have been, the battle with the skeletons was at least predictable. The damned hunchback, on the other hand, was a complete unknown. There was nothing worse than facing an enemy that you knew nothing about. As the cohort headed deeper into the tunnel, Sonny caught up with Effie and asked with a hint of idle curiosity in his voice, "By the way, how do you even know your way around the catacombs?" It wasn't like she could have leisurely explored these deadly tunnels alone. The huntress gave him a dubious look and shrugged. "This knowledge is sort of passed down between the outer settlement hunters. I've been here a couple of times before, trying to escape from especially terrible nightmare creatures. Although, to be honest, I only descended this deep into the catacombs once." Effie shivered. "I was new in the Dark City at that time. Back then, the strongest hunter in the outer settlement sort of took me under her wing. We went down here with an entire party. Sonny scratched the back of his head and grimaced when his battered body protested against the sudden movement. Yeah, that party must have been very strong to return from this place alive. Alive. The huntress glanced at him and smiled darkly. Who said anything about returning alive? Actually, they all died. I was the only one to survive. Sonny stared at her for a long time and then asked, "If they all died, then why the hell did you bring us here?" Effie shrugged, because no matter how strong that party was, they weren't even close to this one. "Do you even realize how powerful the six of us are, all put together? God damn, I wouldn't want to be our enemy." Then she hesitated for a few moments and added, "Plus, this time I know what we're going to face. We'll get out of here in one piece, trust me." Sonny wasn't a particularly trusting person, but at this point he didn't really have a choice. Leaving the tall huntress alone, he walked in silence for a while. The tunnels were now strongly angled down. With each minute, the cohort was descending deeper and deeper underground. Slowly, his curiosity awakened. Now that the harrowing battle against the army of the dead was behind them, Sonny began to wonder about something peculiar. Where exactly did all those human skeletons come from? There were hundreds, if not thousands of them down here in the catacombs. Even if every hunter that had ever lived in the outer settlement died in these tunnels, their number wouldn't account for that much. Not to mention that people who perished in the Dark City tended to end up eaten by some terrible monster, their bones pulverized into dust by its teeth. His pointless pondering was interrupted by Effie, who suddenly gestured for the cohort to stop. After discussing something with Nephis, she gave her a nod and turned to the rest of them. "Listen up. We're close to the central chamber of this maze. The exit to the surface is right ahead. However, getting to it won't be easy." "No." The tall huntress hesitated and then said, "If we want to make it outside, we will have to act fast. There's a big fat bastard of a nightmare creature that lives in that chamber. However, it takes time for it to fully wake up, so don't stop to look at it. Don't panic. Don't lose your cool. It might look scary, but if you follow Neff and do what she tells you to do, you should be all right." She waited for a bit to make sure that everyone understood her meaning, and then grinned. "All right, if everyone is ready, let's go meet the Lord of the Dead." Lord of the Dead. Not liking the sound of this name one bit, Sonny summoned the Midnight Shard and reluctantly followed after Effie. Soon, they entered a giant underground chamber. Once Sonny saw what was inside of it, his eyes grew wide. He finally understood where all those skeletal wraiths came from. He also understood where the inhabitants of the ancient city had disappeared to. They were all here.